in April of 42, and he got his wings and a commission as a second lieutenant, graduating from advanced pilot training in April of 43. So that was a year's time. He went through pre-flight, primary training, basic pilot training, and then advanced pilot training.
Yeah, I think. I think towards towards the end of the war, I think it was rushed. What I was reading, where these fighter pilots were being cranked out, in a couple months' time period.
Yeah, a lot of them had just had to learn on the job.
Yeah,
but they still had better training than the Germans did, because the German, the Luftwaffe, they lost so many pilots that they didn't have. They were running out of fuel. They didn't have the fuel to do a lot of training. So a lot of these German pilots later on in the war, they hardly had any training at all. And that the Luftwaffe really just got annihilated and wiped out by the 8th Air Force, particularly the P-51 Mustangs.
Oh yeah, and plus, I hate to say it, the P-51s were a more advanced, faster plane than what the Germans had at the time. Other than towards the end of the war when they came out with the jets.
Yeah, but that was too little, too late.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Well, again, your father was over there. He did on the 8th mission. That's when he was shot down.
Right. Yeah, they were on a bombing mission to Frankfurt when they dropped their bombs successfully, but their bombardiers had got hit by flak, and they couldn't get them back up. And as a result, that caused a drag in the plane. They lost airspeed, and they started lagging behind the formation, heading back to England, and they were singled out by 2 German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters.
Oh, boy.
And in the ensuing air battle, the Susan Ruth was shot down.
Now, didn't a couple crew members perish on the plane when it was hit?
Yeah, 2 of the crew were killed from the fighter's 20 millimeter cannon fire. The other 8 crew members bailed out successfully. They were all injured to one degree to others, some very seriously. But both those German fighter planes were shot down as well. One was piloted by Siegfried Merrick. His plane crashed, and he was killed in the plane. The other was piloted by Hans Berger, who was able to bail out, and he made it through the war. Actually, the gunners on my dad's plane are the ones who shot Hans Berger down, so in essence, they shot each other down. While I was doing my research, one day my wife just casually said, well, why don't you try to find a German pilot that shot down your dad's plane? Like it was as easy as going to the store and buying a loaf of bread. And I thought, oh, she has no idea what she's talking about. It's a stupid idea. There's no way in the world that I could do that. He's probably died during the war, or it's 70 years later. He's passed on by now. I can't speak German anyway. But like a good husband, I did what she told me to do, and I found Hans Berger, which was a thrill that I can't even describe. And fortunately for me, he became a translator after the war, so he speaks perfect English. And he gave me some wonderful insight that's in the book about what it was like to go up against the 8th Air Force. It was very daunting because he was outnumbered like 10-1 every time he went up. He was shot down 3 times, but he made it through the war. And he's 95 years old today. He's still living in Munich, Germany, and we've become good friends.
Did he ever tell you what he thought of the government of Germany during World War II? Was he a Nazi believer, or was he one of the ones that just thought about serving the country?
Well, back then, all the boys and girls were brought up through the Hitler Youth, and Hans said when he was going through that, it was like the Boy Scouts. They went hiking and camping, and it was lots of fun. And initially, the people loved Hitler because after World War One and the Depression, Germany was just a mess. Political parties were fighting. There was no work at all. They were in a deep depression. And Hitler and the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party, they solved the unemployment problem. Everyone was back working. Everyone was able to eat, and the nation was building up their pride again. And so initially, he was looked at as a hero. Kind of brought Germany out of the dregs of World War One. And so, no one knew that he was going to turn into this. They didn't know that he was going to turn into this monster, which he became. Hans. These guys in the Luftwaffe. They weren't. You had the regular German army, the Wehrmacht, who were kind of like the. But then you also had the other part of the German armed forces were the SS Waffen, and those were the Nazis, and those were the guys that ran the concentration camps, and those were the war crimes guys. These Luftwaffe pilots, they were at a base, far away from Germany, just trying to pretty much like the U.S. airmen. Hans was 20 years old. Fighting for his country, trying to do a job and trying to stay alive. He said it was unfortunate that they had to be shooting like Dad and him had to be shooting at each other, but, that's what they were tasked to do.
That's another thing, too. Being a fighter pilot in a Luftwaffe was just probably as bad as being a pilot on a B-17, maybe even worse because, originally at the start of the war, the Luftwaffe was huge. They had a huge amount of pilots, a lot of planes, and it didn't take long, before it just started dwindling down.
Oh, yeah. Almost all his friends were killed during the war. The Luftwaffe was really formidable. They had a lot of experience, in the Spanish Civil War and in Poland, and, so they had experienced pilots. And at the beginning in 42 and 43, the 8th Air Force was taking devastating losses. Initially, it was 8th Bomber Command's belief that these heavily armed bombers flying in these tight formations could defend themselves against the Luftwaffe. They didn't need any fighter support. But they quickly found out that wasn't the case. And even when they did give them fighter support to begin with, these fighters didn't have the fuel capacity to escort the bombers deep into Germany all the way to the target. They could come across and escort the bombers across the channel into occupied Europe a little ways, but then they had to turn around when they ran low on fuel, where the Luftwaffe would just wait until the Spitfires, the British Spitfires, or the U.S. fighters at the time just turned back for their bases and then come in for the kill. It really hit its peak, or critical point, in October of 1943. What was termed as Black Week. During 4 missions during that week, the 8th Air Force lost 148 bombers. That's almost 1,500 men. And the worst day was October 14th of 1943, when they sent 291 B-17s to bomb the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt. And out of that 291 bombers, 60 were shot down.
Wow.
After that, the 8th Air Force was in shock. There was no way that they could sustain those type of losses. And for the rest of the year, they didn't fly any missions into Germany, and they only flew a handful of missions into occupied Europe. It wasn't until external fuel tanks were added to the P-57 Thunderbolts and the introduction of the P-51 Mustangs right at the end of 43, the beginning of 44, where these bomber formations finally had fighter escorts that could take them all the way deep into Germany to the target and escort them all the way back. as I alluded to, the P-51s were really strategic. They basically wiped out the Luftwaffe by the time D-Day rolled around. There's a quote, Eisenhower told the troops, don't worry about the Luftwaffe. If you look up at the sky and see a plane, it'll be one of ours.
Oh, yeah. They didn't, the last probably year of the war, they didn't have much of an Air Force left. I mean, they were spread out everywhere. I mean, they were over in Africa. They were over in, around Italy. They had, they were just spread out, so far. And plus the Russian front, I just can't imagine how ever want to be a pilot in the Luftwaffe.
Yeah, that was, and they had no mission limits. In fact, they didn't get leave, they didn't get passes. They just flew and flew and flew. So it was very tough to be a Luftwaffe pilot. And then when Jimmy Doolittle took over the 8th Air Force in the beginning of '44, he also let the P-51 Mustangs loose to go after the Luftwaffe and hit their bases and hit them on the ground. And that's when they really wiped out those German fighters.
Yeah, I think that was a major part of the loss for Germany during World War II. When they lost the Luftwaffe, they didn't even have a way to defend their own troops at that point.
No, yeah, and then when D-Day rolled around, and then after D-Day, when they moved up, up through France and into Belgium and then into Germany, the U.S. had air superiority, and they just those German troops in the ground would just be decimated by U.S. fighters or medium bombers, like the B-25 or B-26s. They had these convoys or railroads. I mean, they would just get shot to pieces by the U.S. Air Force.
Could you imagine, though, to have been a pilot in the Luftwaffe towards the end of the war, one of the few planes they had left, and, have to go out and, do your job, and knowing that, you have maybe your plane, and you're going on a mission by yourself, or maybe with one or two other planes, and you're going to be maybe in countering, dozens of ours.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, out of curiosity, how did you find him? Living in Germany. I mean, just going by somebody's name. How did you even find his name? I mean, how did you do this? That's my curiosity.
Well, I went on Google. Just entered trying to find a Luftwaffe pilot, and a couple forums came up, which I joined, and I posted inquiries on these forums because I knew the day my dad's plane was shot down, the location of where my dad's plane was shot down, the time of day it was shot down. And in a week, two guys got back to me, one from England and one from Belgium. And on that day, there were 12 B-17 shot down, and the one shot down south of Chimay, Belgium, was shot down by Lieutenant Hans Berger. And the guy in Belgium that contacted me, he was is a Luftwaffe historian and written a number of books about the Luftwaffe and knew Hans personally. And he contacted Hans and asked him if it'd be okay if I contacted him. For the book, I just interviewed Hans over the phone and through email. And, I was so excited to find this guy, because my dad knew all the U.S. records show was that the plane was shot down by two German Focke-Wulf fighters. In 2016, I met Hans personally. I went over to Munich and filmed an interview with him and met him face to face. And he pulled out his logbook and showed me his entry on February 8th of 1944, where he shot down a B-17 and he had to bail out after being shot down himself. So, yeah, that was really a thrill. I was, to be able to find him is just amazing. People ask me, well, don't you hate this guy who shot down your dad's plane? Tried to kill your dad, but, my dad's gunner shot him down too. But I don't feel any animosity toward him at all. Actually, I feel kind of a relationship or a kinship with him. At one moment in time,